today we've come to better understand the importance of African American authors of children's literature. All of them, not just some of them, but all of them. And we know in Washington, D.C., that Eloise was a powerful voice in this city, okay? She wrote more than 40 books before she died. And so I see no better way to honor her than for us to advocate for this. So you will get a copy of a letter that Sharon sent. We're gonna email blast it to everybody who registered for this event. As you know, there were a lot of people who registered, didn't come out because of the rain or whatever. And so now this is a time for us to organize and get this done. So I just wanted to alert you, when you get that letter, that email, don't sit it out, do something, okay? Thank you.
Good afternoon. When you come before an audience to introduce the last panel, you oftentimes say, we saved the best for last. But that's not true, because every panel in here has been the best. This just happens to be not the last panel, but a concluding panel. Because as Jeanette has pointed out, the power and the energy that is contained within this presentation, the expressions, are something that we're going to bottle. We're going to open up that bottle another time so that it can be poured as libations for others to learn and grow from. So I'm excited to introduce the last presenter. But before I do, I just wanted to make a comment.
Oh, I'm not.
Some of you may have heard of something. There was a mention earlier about black music and arts. And I just want to remind people that the literary arts, books, words, literature, oftentimes fuels the other arts, correct? So I just want to tell you about We Nation Radio. You may not have heard of We Nation Radio, but your grandchildren will know it. We Nation Radio is an existing internet, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week radio station with DJs that plays black children's music. I'm a patron. One of my favorite people on We Nation Radio, who with a group of other black children's musicians. Now again, let's be clear about this. These are people who say that it's inappropriate for my 8-year-old to listen to Jay-Z. It's totally fine for my 16-year-old, but it's inappropriate, it's not age appropriate for my 8-year-old to listen to Jay-Z, and that's modest. There are some others you know that I could mention that will curl your hair. We Nation Radio speaks to that. But when I asked Uncle Devin and two of his Emmy, not award-winning, but Emmy-nominated black children's artists, what was going on, where was it coming from, because I missed it, they said black children's books, right? The literary arts, words, fuels other arts. You all should know, those of you who labor to write and publish these books against these obstacles, that you may have opened the door for other artistic expression to accomplish the goals that you wanted. When you listen to We Nation Radio and you hear the positive go-go funky beat, and you hear young musicians who are deliberately saying, I want to message differently in the words, and I can use the sounds and the beats and the music that everybody's attached to, and I can message on some things, you should know that your books, your writing, your literature was maybe the start for them seeing other art expressions. So we're going to see this. We're going to see it in music. We're going to see it in painting. We're going to see it in AI. A whole sphere of children's art stuff that is creative and expressive to do what? Simply tell our story. Now, Joy Jones, who's going to introduce the panelists and who will lead this discussion,
Thank you.
is a multifaceted storyteller. I knew of her because of the Washington Post fame and publications, and I knew of her in that adult context that the Washington Post people and the famous like to talk about around, I don't know, relationships or something. But we could, right here, not here today, to talk about young people. But I didn't know until I worked with Janetta, and a lot of us didn't know things until we hooked up with Janetta, about your work with children's books, about your work to bring light to all of this creative collective, your work to empower not only your work, but others. So it seems very appropriate and a pleasure for me to introduce Joy Jones, who is a well-educated, cum laude graduate, author, publisher, writer, and distinguished woman of color, who will chair and introduce the next panel. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Let me introduce the distinguished writers who are sharing the stage with me today. Right here we have Kwame Alexander. James Brown used to describe himself as the hardest working man in show business. Well, this is the hardest working man in publishing. He has 1,000 accolades behind his name. Most recently, he's won an Emmy, 1 or 2? Just 1. I think he was nominated for 2, yes. And we're so proud that he's from the Washington metropolitan area. Kwame Alexander. Seated next to him is David Miller. And he has a program called Dare to be King. And I'm impressed with that because, again, even though we are purveyors of our own culture and history, there's so much that we don't even know. And I'm going to prevail upon him to talk about a little bit about his work, because he educated me when we were talking about some things that black folks are doing and achieving that I wasn't aware of. And it's so important for us to be informed. He's out of Baltimore, but now lives in Prince George's County, so we're glad that...
No, D.C.
Oh, you're in D.C. proper. All right. All right. We're glad that he's here with us and local. Our next writer is Trisha Elam Walker. I met her. I met her in my house. My house used to be the poetry hangout for a group called The Spoken Word. And we had the pleasure of having Trisha come to us and share some of her short stories. We were principally a poetry group at that time, but she shared some short story, a story that I remember in particular about a girl who used to babysit for her kids. She exploded into the children's publishing scene with a book that got a lot of awards off the break. And her second children's book also has received a lot of accolades as well. So welcome Trisha to the stage. And then we're going to have some responsive remarks at the end. I'm blocking on your name, so help me.
Tiffany Mitchell-Patterson, yes.
Yes, Tiffany Patterson will be the respondent who will tie up all of our loose ends and make sense of our comments. So everybody here used to be a child. And so I would like to ask you, a two-part question. What book left an impression upon you when you were a kid? And if you're like me, you probably didn't see a lot of black books at that time. So was there also a black book that made an impression on you either as a child or a young adult?
So, all the books I grew up with were books written by black authors. I thought that black books were the only books. So I had the opposite experience. I grew up in the 70s in Brooklyn, New York, and my parents, who were very bookish, had on the shelves Ernest Gregg's and The Sun God Said That's Hip. They had on the shelves Spin a Soft Black Song by Nikki Giovanni. They had on the shelves Some of the Days of Everett Anderson by Lucille Clifton. They had on the shelves, so in 74, I was the oldest. In 74, my sister was born. And I was happy, but I was a little upset because I thought I was the kid. And what did my parents do? They got me She Come Bringing Me That Little Baby Girl by Eloise Greenfield. That was by Eloise, right? So all I had was black books. And so by the time I got to middle school, and my teachers wanted me to read Tuck Everlasting, I was like, I'm not interested in that. I was like, can I bring in my own book? And so I brought in Man, Child in the Promised Land by Claude Brown. So I grew up with Sharon Bell Mathis books. I grew up with all these books. These were the default. These were the books. Everything else was, diverse for me.
So I didn't discover black authors and black books until probably the 10th grade. And growing up in Baltimore, attending Baltimore City Public Schools, we would actually cut school. And don't look surprised. We would cut school and go to the Pratt Library. And that's how we discovered Autobiography of Malcolm X, books by Garvey, by Marcus Garvey, by Huey Newton, because we didn't get that in school. And so it was just kind of being wayward teenagers, cutting school, found out that the library was a pretty cool place to discover and to dream. And so that's how we really discovered black books. But some of the earlier books that I read as a child were written by all white authors.
So I had more of the experience that Joy talked about, because I grew up in the 50s, and there weren't books with characters that looked like me. But my mother was a librarian, books were mandatory, reading was mandatory in our house. So I read books like Eloise, who lived in the hotel. I don't know if y'all know about Eloise. Eloise and Madeline, the 12 little girls who got out of line. And I loved those books because they were mischievous little girls, and I was one of those. And so I could relate to them. And one of the things that I think was positive about that experience was I learned how to empathize with people that did not look like me, which is something that doesn't always happen with white children. And so the first black book that I remember, I was older then, was Snowy Day, and it was not written by a black author, as you guys know, but it had a black character. And that was very significant to me, but like I said, I was older, so it really wasn't, it was just something for me to see that could be, that was a possibility.
As a young adult, I took a creative writing class.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't know. You want me to jump in? Or I
Yeah,
can
please jump in.
Tiffany jumps in, just like Jayla. Okay. And I'm an educator. I've been an educator for, hello. I'm an educator. I've been an educator for 15 years, both in middle schools, but also college education, preparing future teachers. And I'm a board member for Teaching for Change. So I've been working with them as a justice-oriented educator for a long time. I think I had a similar experience to Kwame, where the default was black as a child of the 80s and 90s, but my mother was a teenager in the movement. I'm from Hampton, Virginia, so I grew up right down the street from Hampton University. So we saw a lot of black people in professions. I had a lot of black teachers, so we had a lot of that at home. And I would say more at home was more radical, and I would say at school the books were there. But the book that really shaped me was Malcolm X. I think when I read that in 6th grade, I said, I'm down with the movement, and I'm going to stay there. So that was something that really transformed me.
Thank you, Tiffany. As a young adult, I took a class on creative writing at GW, and I think everybody in the class, except for myself, was a lawyer, an ex-lawyer, or had just graduated from law school. So that brings me to my next question, and I'll start with Patricia, since she is a lawyer as well. What other jobs have you worked, and what other activities have you participated in that has informed your work as a writer?
Well, I was one of those people who, although I loved writing and I loved reading, I didn't see a path to making money that way. And in my mind, I didn't really have any role models who did that. But I did have many lawyers in my household. My dad was a judge, one of the first black judges in Boston. My uncle was a lawyer. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to law school. And I majored in English, so I was writing all through college, but I went to law school, and I chose a law school that was pass-fail and had a class called Legal Imagination. And so I really enjoyed law school, which most people don't say. So that was you know, that was my path, and I did a lot of different legal jobs trying to find love and happiness. And so I represented juveniles, I did divorces, I did landlord-tenant, I worked for a small law firm, I worked for a larger law firm. My last 10 years, I was an administrative law judge for DC government. But the whole time I was always writing on the side, and finally, in my 40s, with 3 children, I was like, I need to figure out how to do this thing that I love. And I went back to school part-time and went to the University of Maryland, got my MFA in creative writing. That is where I wrote my first adult novel, Breathing Room, and really, really figured out the path to being a writer. I think after Breathing Room came out, I thought Oprah was gonna call me because, because we have the same birthday, same day, same year, everything. And we sent her a picture of my license with, you know, the date highlighted, but I'm still waiting for a girlfriend to call. But anyway, I started teaching and writing, and I love that, and that's what I do now.
And Cara Olivia wants to point out that you teach at Howard University.
I teach at Howard. I teach creative writing, fiction and nonfiction. Yes, and I just got tenure, so I'm very proud of it.
Congratulations.
Anybody else want to share their activities or other jobs?
So for about 14 years, I taught in a number of jails throughout the state of Maryland, and really miss, you know, going on the other side of the wall, working with primarily, you know, black and brown men who are locked up in the state of Maryland, even have done work as far as Hagerstown. One of the things that I think for me was super important is that a lot of the men didn't discover the power of reading and writing until they got locked up, which I think is profoundly disappointing in this country, that you find the power of reading and writing once you commit a crime and become incarcerated. And I just think that there's so many amazing black men and women who are incarcerated, who are novelists, who can push out, who have the ability to push out children's books, plays. But I think, to me, the failure of the public schools in terms of extinguishing intellectual curiosity, particularly among, you know, black men and boys. You know, Jawanza Kunjufu talks a lot about black boys become disconnected from school by the 3rd grade. And so, you know, for me, I think we have to figure out ways that we can better partner with schools to really emphasize reading and writing. When I go to a school to do a book signing, oftentimes the boys tell me that they don't like writing, they don't write at all. But if I give them a creative writing prompt, they are ready to go. So again, I just don't think that we're doing enough, particularly in the public school space, to get young people excited about reading and writing on the front end. And then I think what ends up happening is, particularly many folks get excited about reading and writing and law when they get locked up. And I think that that's fundamentally problematic, that you don't discover books until you go to prison.
You just made me think about Reginald Dwayne Betts. I know a lot of you all know. Amazing writer, Question of Freedom, just got a MacArthur, and that he had that experience.
P.G. County.
So I always wanted to be a writer. I knew I was going to be a writer, even when I couldn't see that I wasn't writing very well. I graduated from Virginia Tech having studied with Nikki Giovanni, so I thought I was well equipped. And so when I moved to DC, everybody was like, you gotta go to the 3rd floor and meet Ethelbert Miller. Like, if you wanna be on the poetry scene, you gotta meet Ethelbert. So I remember meeting Ethelbert and him being very kind and him not telling me, man, you can't write. But him giving me some sense that I had some potential. I remember going to see Joy and Stover and Kenny Carroll in the spoken word in their group. And so there was a theater poetry performance troupe that I started. And I invited a lot of the DC literati. And A.B. Spellman showed up. And I'm thinking, I was 22, 23 years old. I'm thinking, I'm the man, I'm a poet. I'm about to do this. And I I knew that, I think it was free to come to the performance, but I knew if I wanted to make some money from my writing, I was gonna have to have a product. So I remember going to Kinko's to print copies of a book, a saddle-stitch book that was called Survival in Motion. And the clerk at Kinko's across the street was Jelani Cobb. He was the clerk who printed the books for me, okay? So I knew that I wanted to be a working writer, and I was trying to figure it out. So you fast forward, 1997 to 2005 was a crucial period in that development. 3 things that happened. Number 1, Breathing Room came out during that time, and I was like, wow, look at this novel, and it's beautiful, and it's brilliant, and I can do that. And I feel like it was published, was it Random House or Doubleday? Simon & Schuster. Okay, so there's a path forward. I can be like Patricia Elam. Okay, the second thing that happened, because I was also publishing my own books. Paul Coates publishes Gone Fishing. Now, this is a huge thing that happened in '97 because Walter Mosley is an established mystery novelist, award-winning, commercially successful, who's been published by this major New York publisher. And now he's gonna be published by Black Classic Press. So now there's a way forward for me as a book publisher. And so in those sort of things that happened in that period, I knew, even though I wasn't making any money, even though I wasn't the best writer, that I knew that there was a path forward, and that if I stuck with it, I could become a writer who was able to not only write really good books, but to take care of his family.
Anybody else?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. I was interested with Sister Garima's comment earlier about writing books that aren't in opposition to something. The few times I read Black books as a kid, and even now, I appreciated the books that were published, but I often didn't see me. You know, my daddy wasn't a numbers runner. I wasn't recruited into a gang. And so although I appreciated urban, gritty novels about Black life, I also wish that there were just stories about Black folks doing regular stuff, and not always necessarily in a dire life and death crisis. So the image that we present to people, both to other Black people and to the world of what Black people are doing, I think is important. So I would like to ask the panelists, what kinds of things do you take account of when you're creating a story or creating a character in terms of how you want the world to see Black folks, or what you're trying to do to shape or improve the image of Black folks in literature? And I'd like to start with David Miller, because in preparing for this panel, he shared with me something called Fathers' Involvement with Their Children in the United States from 2006 to 2010. And one of the statistics that surprised me was that Black fathers spend, let me read it correctly so I don't misquote.
You need me to help you?
Okay, I got it. Okay. A large percentage of Black fathers, 41%, help their children with homework every day more than Hispanic or white fathers. So that was a surprising statistic to me. So the question is, what kinds of things do you think about in terms of the image you're presenting of Black people in your work?
You know, so I think oftentimes in Black America, we have a PR problem because we tend to focus on a deficit narrative when there's so many amazing things happening in Black America. And that particular data set, it's amazing that it isn't talked about enough. So I earned a PhD in social work from Morgan State University, and my dissertation looked at the relationships between Black fathers and daughters. And one of the things that was really frustrating doing the research was I probably read over 150 dissertations about absent Black fathers. Most of the data that I've read was about absent Black fathers. But when you really dive into the literature, you find, and this is just one report that highlights the fact that black fathers tend to be more involved than fathers of any other racial group, but that's not going to be on the front page of the Washington Post or the New York Times or within any major magazine in this country. And so for me, I'm real big on images. I'm real big on creativity. I'm interested in telling stories that get children excited about reading and writing. And I also know that as a children's book author, I have to create stories that can compete with a cell phone, right? And I know that's a tall order, but I just think that so much emphasis now is focused on technology and social media that creating very innovative and creative stories with a lot of colors within the covers, just high-end illustrations, illustrations that are very relatable are the things that get children and parents excited about reading.
You just made me think about something with my book, Nana Akua Goes to School. I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, but there was a part in the book where the father picks the little girl up from school and takes her home, and then somehow my publisher wanted the father not to come back or something, and I was like, no, it was very important to me that the father come back, and you all know why.
Disappear,
right, you know, so it was just crazy, and you know, to her it was a small thing or whatever, and I was like, no, this is an important thing. This is a whole family. I need the father to come back. So those kinds of things, I mean, I think it's really important. The images we put out, the representation is important. Yes, there are single-parent families, and I've written about that too, but in that particular scene, that was important to me, that the dad come back.
I had, so there's a TV series that I produced on Disney Plus. It's called The Crossover. And during the making of it, one of the Disney executives, they took me out to dinner and they said, Kwame, we need your show, this is literal conversation, y'all. We need your show to be blacker.
American fiction.
Tell us how black people love. Can you add some graffiti? These are real conversations I'm having. And so, when you read First Light by Ethelbert Miller, you know it's a black person writing this because of just the jazz, the blues. But he's writing about stuff that's universal. He's writing about black people love, live, hope, dream, smile, dance, eat, just like everybody else. And so when I'm writing, I am writing from the vantage point of that. Am I going to love this book? Am I going to love this book in a way that I live my life? And so Cortland talked about it. The mind of an adult begins in the imagination of a child. The only way we're going to be able to become, in particular, white folks are going to become more connected, more understanding, more empathetic, more human when it comes to their relationship with non-white people, is we got to elevate, they've got to elevate their imagination. And what better way to do that than through the pages of a book?
And while I'm not a writer, I think how this translates to the schoolhouse is very similar. We do lack a lot of diverse representations of the black experience, particularly here in DC. They are met with a lot of trauma-induced narratives, as if there are different types of families that live here, and also that there's not a resistance to it, there's not a response to it, there's not a community piece that goes into even those neighborhoods that may feel a little rough. Students may still feel safe within that enclave and that community, and that's not represented. So it's also like those same conversations of, well, is this black, or what books are we putting in front of it? We need these diverse representations to also be in the classrooms so that students can see themselves, see others, but also just get to exist. There's so much, I think, what you were talking about of spirit murdering that happens with our young black children when they enter schools. Like, they may feel free when they're at home and then with their loved ones, and then they come into this space that says, you are just this, you are this box. or you're not deserving of these high-level literature, or you're not deserving to have this in front of you. You're low, you can't read, you can't do this. These are the things that our children hear that we have to combat within the school system. So I think the more narratives that we can get in front of our students, the better.
The book Nappy Hair by Cara Olivia, it just begs to be transported off the page and read aloud. And you've missed a treat if you haven't had her present the book in an audience, because she has people do the call and response thing. So the oral tradition is very strong among Black folks. And I'm just curious, has the oral tradition informed any of your work, if at all?
I mean, all of it. Just, you know, being in class with Nikki and going to readings. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and going to readings at a place called The East, and seeing, you know, Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez and Sun Ra as a kid, you know, that you begin to see the importance and the significance of the performance. The book I talked about earlier, The Crossover, there was a teacher in Lancaster, Texas, and she had posted on Instagram that she had to lock up her copies of the book because the boys were stealing it. And then reading the book and then raffling it off to girls to read. And so, why are they stealing the books? I mean, just check it out. So I flew down there and I gave every 7th grader a copy of the book. And then kids were like, Mr. Alexander, can you read from the book? And so I read them a piece, you know, these 150 7th graders sitting in the library. I just read them, but I didn't just read it. I gave them everything I had learned over these past 30 or so years of being in this literature and performance world. And I read them a poem about, if my hair were a tree, I'd climb it. I'd kneel down beneath and enshrine it. I'd treat it like gold and then mine it. Each day before school, I unwind it. And right before games, I entwine it. These locks on my head, I designed it. And one last thing, if you don't mind it, that bet you just made, I decline it. And all the boys were like, oh, whoa. So I think, especially in the Black literary tradition, performance is crucial. And it's a part of it.
And the only thing I would add is, you know, I'm a byproduct of hip hop. But one of the things that has been really fascinating is introducing 5th and 6th grade boys to the Last Poets and Gil Scott-Heron, right? Introducing them to, you know, Public Enemy. And so I really think it just really comes down to exposing particularly young minds to things that they may not necessarily know exist, because they're bombarded with what's happening now with, you know, popular artists, but oftentimes they just don't really understand the history and the legacy of spoken word and Black music.
So I would say the oral tradition for me started in my family. As I mentioned, my mom was a librarian, so she read to us. She read to herself, but she also read to us, and she read with expression and meaning. And my dad, even though he was a judge, he was also a writer, and he was an actor, so he would act out these different parts, and he'd make all these different voices. And so, you know, that was instilled in me. And when I started reading my work, especially to children now, I remember that and try to do that. And I just want to tell you one quick story. I went to Ghana in May with wonderful Monica's tour company. If you have to go to Ghana, this is the person you need to check out. Anyway, and I was reading, my cousin and I were there because my cousin's the illustrator of Dream Street, and we were reading to the children with expression and, you know, not as well as Kwame, but doing our best. And we were met with these blank faces, and we were like, what is happening? And the principal told us, they don't understand your accent. And I'm like, I have an accent? How could that be? You know? And so then she read it with, you know, her twee. And then their faces lit up, and then we were celebrities. But I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I think story is just powerful in general, and I think also our young people have stories, and they bring the things that color their world, and how we listen to them, I think matters. I think our families are our first experience. I think I'm also a hip hop head, so that definitely comes into play. But I also say even valuing the stories of just regular folks, right? Those people that are just in the building. My grandmother did not read and write. She was a crab picker, and she would just tell gossip of what was happening down at the crab factory, and I'd be like, yes, girl. And I think sitting at the feet of these elders, I mean, obviously I didn't say yes, girl, I said that in my mind, right? You just, you don't say that to a black elder, but at that time you're just like, But I think just sitting at the feet of anyone and listening is so powerful in the work of the experience of not just storytelling, but also in education. It's telling those stories and listening.
Earlier, Tricia, you mentioned that your mother was a librarian, and so reading was not an option. And Kwame, you said there were lots of books on the shelves, and you were encouraged to read those. And for myself, my mother was a teacher. My father was a social worker, but he liked to write on the side as a hobby. So for us, at least, it was almost inevitable that we would have an appreciation of the written and the spoken word. But not everybody has that background. So what advice would you have for parents and educators to promote literacy?
Yeah, I think, kids do what we do, not what we say. And so this idea of reading to your children, I think that's crucial, that's important, that modeling. I often tell teachers, who complain that their students aren't writing or don't want to write. And I say, well, are you writing? Like, you got to do the thing that you expect your children to do. And so I can't stress enough to read aloud at home. I read to both of my daughters. I read to both of my daughters before they were even born, like in the womb. And one of my daughters, she wanted to, we were on a plane, and we had just left a speech I had given. And the speech was in Boston, and there was a quote that I delivered during the speech. I somehow came up with it, and the quote was, books are amusement parks, and sometimes you gotta let kids choose the rides. And I delivered this in the speech. It was a big thing. So later on, we're on a plane, and my then 8-year-old, she wants to watch a movie. It's like an 8-hour flight. I forgot where we were going, but she wants to watch movies. And I say, you have to watch, in order for you to watch an hour of movies, you have to read at least 30 pages, okay? So we got this thing going. So she immediately pulls out a graphic novel, which is like it's an ebullient, an elegant comic book, or at least that's what I thought at the time. I know, I'm hating.
Very complex.
So she pulls out a graphic novel. And I say, no, you can't read this. You got to read a serious book. You got to read a Jacqueline Woodson novel, or you can't read that. And she stands up and she says, Mom, I thought Dad said books were amusement parks, and kids should be able to choose the rides.
Well.
If you want a kid, so of course I let her read it. But if you want to it's not enough to get our children to read. We want them to want to read.
Right.
And if you want your children to read, you can't do any better than student choice. Then let the child choose the book. Help your children find their way to that book that's going to resonate and relate to them. That's my answer.
I would add, we have to do a better job of supporting libraries, particularly school-based libraries. I went back to the elementary school. I usually go back to the elementary school that I went to every year, and I'm often frustrated at the condition of the libraries. The sad reality is, ladies and gentlemen, particularly in urban schools, many of our schools don't have a full-time librarian, and many of our schools don't even have a library. Right? And so how serious are we about literacy in this country when we have brand new football stadiums, baseball stadiums, where, for example, like in Baltimore, where I grew up, the Ravens don't even pay rent on a multi-million-dollar facility in downtown Baltimore, yet there's so many libraries in the local school district that don't have a full-time librarian, and that don't have books. So the question is, how serious are we about literacy? And so we got to do a better job of, how many librarians are here? Raise your hand if you're a librarian, right? So let's give it up for the librarians. Really got to focus more energy on librarians.
We could not even watch TV when I was growing up, but we could read anything. And I remember, I'm not sure how old I was, but I was at my uncle's funeral, and most of the funeral stuff was over. And I was looking through his bookshelves, and I found this book called The Story of O. Is anyone familiar with that book? It's a French book basically about sex. That's all I'll say about that. Anyway, so I started reading it, became very engrossed in it. And some of my relatives were horrified, and they went to my mother, and they were like, what, how? And my mother was like, it's reading, she can read it. So I love that about her, you know, miss her dearly. The only other thing I want to say is that also parents be patient, because with my children, I read to them in the womb, I read to them all the time, did everything my mommy taught me. None of them liked to read. One of my sons was dyslexic, and so that was, you know, became a problem from him until we figured it out and he got books on tape. But now as adults, my oldest son is 41, he reads all the time, we talk about books all the time. You know, my other two read, not as much as him, but they do read now, they do enjoy reading, but it took a long time, so be patient.
I definitely want to value diverse forms of reading, so if it is that comic book, if it's high interest, if it's student choice based, let them start there, and then we can apply the skills to help them learn how to read. If the want is there, then you can apply the need. That's so important, especially with our older students. I work a lot in middle and high schools, and a lot of students, when they come with perhaps a deficit in reading, there's a vulnerability, there's a angst, there's a I don't want to show that I can't do this. So we definitely in that place want to have age appropriate. We also don't want to give them a children's book. In that sense, there may be one that's high interest, they're very complex, because I have had 18-year-olds sitting on a carpet with a children's picture book because it's like, ooh, it's like I could pretend I'm in kindergarten again. But we want to make sure that they're age-appropriate topics that are topical to them, that are of interest. If it's song lyrics, we've done that as an entry point for students. Also, there's an access issue. Many of students I taught didn't have a DC library card. So we went to DC Library, and we're like, this is free, you can get this. And guess what? We invited their caregivers as well. So you can also come with us. You can rent movies. You can rent, it's not just about books. You can get audio books, but you can get your DVDs. You can get whatever you want from the library. And I think it's introducing that access piece that also helps to break down some barriers of some of the things why, not just for their students, but also for their families.
I would challenge one thing you said about the age appropriateness, and I don't know if you were saying this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I would posit that there are occasions where you can use, for instance, children's picture books with high school students.
Yeah, no, I was saying that, I did say that you could do that, and I've done that with 18-year-olds, but sometimes what ends up happening is that there are teachers that will give a student a book that they think they can't read, and it might be like, Johnny Goes to the Store, to a 15-year-old who is like, wow. And then you have stopped and closed that door. Now, a high-interest picture book with amazing artwork and all of that, yes, use those. But please do not tarnish or diminish our students' thinking and ability, because that has actually happened, and that causes a lot of curriculum of violence and harm to our students. I've had several teenagers that have said they've put this book in front of me like I'm in 4th grade. And no, I'm not doing that. And they walk out the door. And when they walk out the door, unfortunately, if they're 15, 16, 17, they're not coming back in. So think about ways that once you know your students, get those topics. So when I say age appropriate, not so much like, let them read whatever, but more so thinking about, don't make them feel like this is something that, but if you're going to do something, really try to pick high interest. Comic books have really been a big gateway for students in that way. So that was kind of what I was doing. Cool. But so thank you for clarifying.
I once read a statistic that said everybody who cannot read at 4th grade, that's a prison bed 10 years out. And that's how planning for prisons are done based on the literacy levels of elementary school students. So I want to ask the same question again, how do we promote literacy, but at a policy level, if you have any suggestions or ideas about that?
I think starting too with the access issue, funding for libraries, funding for books for teachers. A lot of teachers are now crowdsourcing, they're funding for themselves, they're paying out of pocket to get those books into the classroom, and books students can take home, not just books that they can have there. So I think that's one. Also, I think these spaces like this are wonderful where you actually see people reading. How do we cultivate that community experience? Like back in the day, people in the hood be like, go to school, go to, get this book, get it, they'll give you stuff, and I did not grow up in a middle-class neighborhood, but there was a lot of culture around, what, you have a chance to do something, do it, and I think some of the part of what we have to do in the community is get back to that. I think we have to also think about the educators in our classrooms. There's a lot happening in schools right now, and there's a lot of burnout, there's a lot of teachers that are harming our black and brown children, and that's just keep it 100. And so we don't even have the right pipeline for educators that look like them to even be in the schools and to do that work to show them, like, this is what you can be. So many of students, I was their first black teacher, and that should not be the case coming in as a middle school or high school teacher. So I think there's a lot of policy things in terms of access, in terms of funding, in terms of paying teachers and librarians more so that they can actually do this work, and thinking about those other services, wraparound services that could also be in the school to help support, amongst other things. I think all this plays into the literacy. And
Black writers had a hard time in generations past. I'm interested in knowing what obstacles did you face, especially things that are not the traditional expected difficulties on your route to publication or living the life of a writer. Oh, nobody had any problems.
Oh, we just got real sad when you said that.
So, the first 14 books I wrote, I self-published. So I published other authors. So when I started publishing with Houghton Mifflin and HarperCollins and Little Brown, I had a certain level of understanding of what goes into book publishing. And so I will say that generally, Black writers are treated as if we are doing you a favor by publishing you. And many Black writers that I know, my peers, they accept that because they're just so happy to be in the room. And so no matter what level of success I achieve, I am still dealing with that reality, but I am not the person who accepts it. And so I'm constantly pushing back, constantly fighting, and no matter, it's my first book, maybe I sold a couple thousand books. I am at the point where I am selling millions of books, and I am dealing with the same exact mentality and the same level of treatment. It does not change. It's mind-boggling.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, it ain't. It really ain't. If you know your history, it ain't. But it is.
For me, it's interesting because I have great relationships with people like Kwame and Derek Barnes and Jerry Craft and others. I probably will never get a publishing deal because I'm stubborn. I got a big ass mouth. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to curse. I got a big mouth. I'm really opinionated, and I really only want to write for Black and brown children. right? Unapologetic about it. And, you know, sometimes I wonder, does my approach and my mindset stand in the way for me to get books out to a larger audience? So I struggle with that. But as an independent author, it's been a great ride. Paul Coates and Black Classic Press publish or prints my books. And if you look at some of my books, I have a couple of them here, probably some of the best print quality that you will find in this country. So I'm fortunate enough to have a long-standing relationship with Paul and Black Classic Press. And I'm also as an independent author, I'm in 40 school districts across the U.S. I'm in New York. I'm in large districts like New York City Public Schools, Detroit Public Schools, and then smaller school districts. But it is a struggle because I look at some of the books that come out through Random House, Simon & Schuster, some of the larger companies, and I'm blown away that some of these white women have gotten these publishing deals. I'm fundamentally floored by the content. You got books on talking chairs and oranges that dance and stuff like that. And while we may need those kinds of books, I also think that we need books, we need historical biographies, right. We need books about just Black life, we need books about the Latinx experience. We need more diversity when it comes to books. So I really struggle with it, whether or not I'll ever even submit a book to a publishing house, because the other thing is sometimes I'm just fundamentally blown away by when I look at a lot of the books that are being printed. And I can go to any school, particularly any urban school in this country, and when I walk in with my books, it's like Jay-Z's walked in the building, like literally. And so.
That's great. Interesting. My reality is a little bit interesting, a little bit of a different issue, I think. I didn't really have problems with the first two books that I did, children's books that I did. But I have a contract for another book that I've had now for a couple of years, and my editor has not liked what I've sent her because she says it's not prize-worthy. And so, you know, that's because one of my books did win a prize. I don't know if that put me in jeopardy because now she's looking for something that she feels is also going to win a prize. So that's been tricky for me, and I'm not sure how much that has to do with being a Black writer or not, but it is challenging.
Maybe we can stop right here to take some questions from the audience if anybody has some comments.
So earlier, I think, Kwame, you mentioned that someone said, well, you're not writing Black enough or something like that. And David, I think you just mentioned, God, I forgot what it was, but it's related to my question. Okay, it reminded me of American Fiction, and I want to know if you all have seen it, what you think about it, and that's really the context of what I'm asking about American Fiction. Jeffrey Wright, Eric Alexander, you know.
Yeah, I read the book. I love the movie, but I read the book back in the 90s, Erasure, by Percival Everett, and think it's one of the top 5 novels I've ever read, and he's one of my favorite novelists of all time. Here's the thing: it's not just in publishing or Hollywood or in corporate America.
It's American.
You will be treated in the way that you allow yourself to be treated. Okay? And so it is white folks are going to be who they're going to be. The onus, I believe, is on me, is on us to stand up, to speak up, to lift our voices for the things that matter to us. Now, you may say, like Derek Bell wrote in Faces at the Bottom of the Well, racism ain't going nowhere. The permanence of white racism. What's also permanent is our resistance to it, is our awareness of who we are. That can't change. Right?
Mic drop.
Okay. I wanted to know, because writing now has grown, because my grandkids talk about ear hustling. You heard about that?
Oh, yeah, we know it.
Okay, well, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I didn't. I didn't.
Really? Okay.
Okay, I am. Ear hustling is my grandchildren, I'm a preacher. And my grandsons and them write about me preaching. And so they write about, this is what grandma do, and they be writing this stuff. And then they have gone to HBCUs and they talk about me and they want oral, and those young kids are writing themselves like they did long time ago when they start stealing the lyrics of the writing. So as we begin to think about writing, we think about ear hustling and the way that they're doing it in social media, in a way of lyrics and TikTok, because they are doing writing in a different way. And this, as they would say, old school. They say that I don't need you to do what I can do for myself because my voice is my voice. And just because you want to sit down with the man and make a deal for $1, I can make the dollar for the dollar under the table. I'll say no more.
Another mic drop. That's a mic drop.
Do you want to speak to this? I guess that's not a question.
I have a question for Kwame, actually. When I was doing some research, I realized that you have an imprint at, I think it's, Harper, is it Harper? HarperCollins. And I was thinking, what does that mean? How does that work? And what is the benefit to you of having that? Are you able to impact? I mean, we see you impact with your work and everything, but in the publishing industry, how does that work for you?
So an imprint is a smaller publishing company within a larger publishing company. And I negotiated a deal for my own imprint. It was called Versify Books. This was back in 2018. And the idea was to be able to, I'm a 25-year overnight success. The idea was to be able to give an opportunity and access to other authors so they didn't have to wait that long. I wanted to be the third floor. I wanted to reach back, okay? So that was the goal. So the publishers were like, oh, so you doing a black imprint? And I was like, nah, I'm not. I'm not doing a black imprint. I mean, we butted heads and that became a thing. You're not doing a black imprint? Like, nah. I'm not doing One World. I'm not doing Arabesque. I just started listing all of these black imprints that have been around that are no longer around. Because publishers have this notion that this thing is a trend, okay? And they're creating something for the moment. I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in creating something that was going to last, an institution. And so I said, no, we're publishing all writers. And so on the first list, the way publishing works is there are lists for each season. There's a spring list, there's a fall list, there's a winter list. So I said for our first list, I published Lamar Giles, young black man from Richmond, Virginia area. Published Raul III, Latinx author from Boston. Published Kadir Nelson, illustrator from California, and published this white woman named Kip Wilson, who's a poet in California. Now, by publishing this white writer, I got access to stuff that most black writers don't know about, which is when a book publishes, if it does not have the right marketing budget and the attention by the sales team, it's never going to sell enough books for you to be able to justify continuing to publish books by this author, let alone this imprint. And so the idea was, I'm gonna try to be strategic in being able to publish black writers. And so while other imprints are no longer around, the imprint still exists, and we published 45 black authors. So trying to be strategic and learn from the people who've done this before me, Hakeem Adabudi at Third World Press, Casselhoun at Red Sea, Paul Coates at Black Classic, my father, Dr. E. Curtis Alexander, Kitchen Table Press. I've tried to learn from people in the past who have done this, and how can I create a sustainable institution that's going to ensure that other black writers have an opportunity to keep doing this.
Yes, we have time for one or two more questions.
You got a budget for the one white writer, but not for the black ones?
No, it was a budget for the imprint. It was a budget for the whole imprint. Yeah, and so what I was implying is that budgets for black authored books are significantly less than budgets for white authors. You look at the contracts that these authors have. In a publishing contract, like Patricia, in your contracts, I don't mean to get all in your business, but do you have a marketing budget, an allotment, a number that's in your contracts? No. Most writers don't know that if you fight for that, you can get an allotment. It can say, for your book, we are going to spend X amount of dollars on marketing. Do you have a discretionary fund in your contract? No, most black writers don't have it because they don't know. Most writers don't have it. And so part of this is education and trying to make sure that people have it, that they know. You can't know what you don't know.
This is true. This is true.
Right, David?
Yeah, I had to hire a publicist.
Right.
Not cheap either.
You've left us speechless. The whole room is just like.
Drop the mic.
I mean, it's really not rocket science. But we don't know about it. We don't understand it. Publishing has always been this sort of, staid, incomprehensible, intellectual thing that's sort of removed, and we don't get it. And so a big part of this is just educating ourselves so we understand it and so that we know it. There's a really great book, the Howard University Press, on the history, I think it was Howard University Press, on the history of black publishing. It's called Propaganda and Aesthetics.
Okay, I was with Random House. Well, I guess I still am. But when it came to publicity, it was a separate office. It wasn't a part of the main contract. It was after I talked to the people for the main contract, then I had to talk to the publicity people, and they would say, you can go, we'll send you to 10 bookstores around the country, whatever it is. And it was completely separate. And maybe, was that so long ago that doesn't happen anymore? Can you talk? I need some advice. You tell.
We all need to.
What you're telling me doesn't fit with what I've known. And I still.
Janetta, I feel like the next conference we should teach a class on publishing.
And I have a live contract with them on this book. It's still open. You need to tell me how to find some information.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. I'll talk to you afterwards and break it down for you. But everything's negotiable. Everything's negotiable.
Well, I'll ask another question. I'm unapologetically analog, still stuck in the 20th century in many ways, but of course things are moving forward. What changes do you see coming to publishing, and how do storytellers need to adapt for artificial intelligence, the increase of stories told via video as opposed to in print, and other changes in our world that affect how stories get told?
David has a friend
Here we go.
who is very immersed in AI and black children's books, so he's going to share a little bit about that.
That's called being put on the spot, right? That's called being put on the spot. Right. But I'm not going to say any names. But a mutual friend of ours has pushed out, I don't know, 6 to 8 children's books using AI in an extremely short amount of time. I'm talking like a month. He just cranking them out, right? And he mails me the books, and I'm looking at the books, and I'm just like, damn, right? You can look at the books and tell that they were artificially generated, right? You can just, huh? But I guess for me, it just takes away from the research, the creativity. When I come up with a book idea, right, I literally will go to a school and introduce the concept to children and ask them what they think about it. And so all of that kind of goes into my, research and development. But I just think with AI, you don't really have to put the sweat equity in.
He's not writing it.
I mean, no, not really. It writes it for you. You could actually just, I mean, the way it's set up now, you can voice record an idea. I want to write a children's book about a boy who loves apples, and it will spit it out for you.
That's scary.
I mean, it is that simple, and then you can give some prompts in terms of what you want the cover design to look like.
Oh, excuse
What
me.
David's saying is, not that you need me to say what you're saying, but I'm a poet, so I'm going to give
get
it a
ready
little
to-
bit of metaphor. There's a reason why the word art is in the word heart. There is no heart in these books that are developed by AI. There's just no heart, and that's the difference.
Heart or soul.
Okay, so as a 63-year-old brother who feels like everything you're saying, but works with 14 to 16-year-old young people, very bright ones, who technology is just a tool. I want to not push back, but I want to wonder, am I being old and I'm hating with that attitude? So here is my question with that preface. How do we, somebody might have said this kinds of thing about current tools that you all have and utilize every day, right? That are important tools, like a card to get to the school. How do we shape this so that we can create a generation of people, black people, boys and girls, men and women, who don't take the shortcut on AI, who recognize that AI is a tool to shorten their process because they no longer have to do certain things. Like, for instance, you got to go to a school to actually talk to some kids and engage them. No offense, that's the right thing to do, but that's an old-fashioned way. They can create a digital tool and get the same feedback. But how do we teach them that? Don't just take the AI and take the shortcut, because what's going to happen is, you're right, and I think we're going to lose this. The marketing people are going to step in and take the AI books, and they're going to market them. And then everybody's going to think that the AI books are the standard because they have been marketed, and the other books, like you say, have not been marketed because they don't have the budget. So what can we do about this to create a group of people who are going to use AI in ways that traditional scholars value?
I just want to jump in there as well that AI also dabbles into stealing ideas. So what is in AI, or when you say, oh, someone teaches apples, they're scouring all this information of what other people have written about apples. So it's not an original idea. And I think teaching our young people that you have agency in your intellect, in your original thought and idea and process, and valuing that, there's been some exercises with young people where they read AI and they're like, this is some trash. Like, what is this? This doesn't even make sense. So also getting them to the media literacy skills, the digital media literacy skills, so they can say, is this truth? Is this what I want to know? And I think while things grow and things are expansive, like we have video, we have this, we have that, there is still always going to be something about the printed word or the book or the scroll or there's still these elements that as things change, some things do still remain the same. And I think it's just teaching our young people to be expansive in their thinking, to explore, but also to be very critical. I think the more we can teach critical thinking skills to our young people so that they can unpack things for themselves and say, hey, and value their own original thought and ideas, I think that would probably be the best route for our young people to go.
And I also think it's important as we learn the new technology that we don't abandon the old school ways. I remember one time going to Alabama as an adult to visit my family there, and we were eating breakfast, which was fried fish and something else, and my uncle said, oh, I just caught this fish this morning. And as someone who's used to going to Safeway to buy something already prepackaged, it sort of jarred me, you know. It just gave me a different relationship to what I was eating. And so the more we have some of those old school experiences in tandem with the new technology, I think that helps people to preserve the best of the old and the new.
Keep our recipes.
So I think my question is maybe more for Tricia and Kwame. As David, you've talked a bit about your reasoning for self-publishing and why you wouldn't necessarily go the route of submitting a manuscript. And so thinking about some of the things that you guys have brought up of the pros and cons of self-publishing versus publishing through a publishing house, what advice do you have for new writers who are creating books for the first time and choosing what route to go?
I find value in self-publishing as well as publishing with traditional houses, as well as publishing with small presses, as well as publishing with university presses, depending on what are you writing? What is your goal? What is your end goal? What are you writing?
So I'm not writing anything yet, but I had an experience where I got to participate on a street team for a woman who published through Simon & Schuster. And it was a book that I felt was a really big and important book about a Black autistic, non-speaking child. And I was part of a street team that did a lot of social media promotion. And I'm realizing, hearing you guys speak about the different things that publishing houses can or cannot offer, this author hired her own publicist, and she had all of us in her autistic community going out and promoting this book wherever we could. So, which seems like if you're with Simon & Schuster, maybe that shouldn't be necessary, right?
Yeah,
And so,
got it.
and this book, you know, it's everywhere. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and, you know, you can find it anywhere. And so, again, it seemed like a big thing, but now hearing some of the details of what goes into the publishing, it feels like she kind of got the short end of the stick from this publishing house.
Sure.
And that's why I'm wondering, you know, what should people be on the lookout for? Or what are kind of pros and cons that we don't even know about of going to either route?
Right, I'll just share one sort of pro or con. When I had the first year of the imprint I told you all about, where I published the writers, I brought them to my home and we did a 2-day boot camp. It was a marketing boot camp. It was a marketing and publicity boot camp. And it was teaching them everything I had learned on how to promote and market my own books so that they can then go out and do it for their books. And so their question was, but Kwame, you're our publisher. Aren't you supposed to market and promote my books? And I said to them really honestly, yes, but I am never going to do as much as you're going to expect or hope that I do. These publicists and these marketing departments, they're one or two people, and they're in charge of 100 authors. There's just physically no way for them to be able to do it. And then on top of that, you're talking about the fact that they don't necessarily, these publishers don't even think black books are going to sell.
Right.
So they're not going to invest. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you're going to be published with a major house, you have to go in knowing that you're going to be doing a lot of the marketing and publicity. As simple as that. Right. That's one thing I'll share.
And they're going to, they're going to market the writers who are already making money for them more than they're going to market a new writer. The only other thing I would add is, that writer should join SCBWI, the Highlights Foundation, because they often have workshops about marketing. And they have regular authors who come on and, really give away their secrets and things that they've learned. And I found those to be really, really helpful. And we can talk afterwards, too.
And SCBWI is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators.
Yes.
SCBWI.
And Highlights.
I'd like to add one other thing to that in addition to what they said. For one of my books, they arranged for me to speak at a conference, and it went very well. And I was sharing that with a friend of mine who is a salesman. And he said, I sent a very nice letter to the publisher saying, thank you for including me, blah, blah, blah. And he said, did you thank the sales staff? And so he told me to thank everybody, not just the important person, but thank everybody. And that has proven to pay off in a lot of different ways. So.
Hi, so I know this panel and then the previous ones we talked about.
Speak into the mic.
Oh, okay. In this panel and in the previous panel, we talked about AI, and I dabble in it, and I really like it. And so I hear, when people talk about AI, sometimes they really think that there is intelligence through it, and then the intelligence behind it is actually piecing together words or pictures to say, what are some of the words that will make sense in this sentence? So AI is being trained by people, and that's why, especially for us minorities, if we don't like the majority telling our stories right now, we need to participate in this training of AI. Otherwise, they're going to get trained by the majority to tell our stories, and we're going to hate it even more. And just to share another personal story, so I'm a writer, and when I was creating my author's website, I put in ChatGPT, hey, write an about me page. Here's, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a writer, and then the ChatGPT dropped out something pretty good. I was like, wow, this is really good. And then I discarded it and wrote my own. And so in terms of, no matter how well an AI is trained, as a writer, you can always respond to that so much quicker and be so much better in incorporating the things around you. So I don't think human authors are ever going to really be replaced by AI.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, janetbruns.com if you guys want to read about the about me that I wrote instead of AI.
I want to follow up, if I can follow up really quickly behind what you're saying, and thank you so much for what you're saying. I'm Paul Coates. So this discussion about AI, I have had the pleasure of being engaged with two brothers, as I said earlier, on the panel, and they just have blown my brains away. The one thing, as the young lady was saying before me, AI really is a group of tools. I mean, so it's not something that's fixed that we should be against. I'm absolutely for it because it's tools that are in development. We are in such an infant stage right now. It's like looking at a motorized car before the Model T. But because we're in that stage, we have the opportunity to work with these tools to craft something that works for us. And there are many black folks that are dealing with AI and publishing right now, setting up platforms, trying to set some better and worse. But these two brothers, like we talk about AI, one of the things that the brother that has the platform in Atlanta, His platform he's going to be using this summer with kids here in DC, teaching them writing. And it isn't a matter of them inputting stuff and taking stuff out and learning writing from that perspective. It actually is the children here actually inputting to create what the message is. The part that we're working on now really is how do we do that and do, for example, the brother that's in Baltimore, his platform deals with the marketing part that you're talking about, Kwame. So you actually can get on there, and some of the scripts that come back are just, you wouldn't use them, but you can develop, you can develop. The point is, I was going to be quiet on this, but I would be doing them a disservice. What we have to understand is we're talking about tools, and we're talking about those tools being very rudimentary right now. But if we are to have a place with those tools at all, we have to jump on them right now. We have to embrace them. We have to learn them, and we have to input and shape those tools so that they serve in our interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask Tiffany to give us the last words.
All right, so I'm going to bring us on home. This has been a very robust discussion, but what kept coming to me was power, power, power. The power of Black books and when and where we meet them, the power of Black writing, the power of representation and what that means for you and for others, the power of ownership, the power of disrupting the gatekeeping so that we make sure that we leverage that ownership to empower others. The power of our community to help us tell those stories and to go back to the community to check us, to make sure we're telling those stories right. And if we're in the business of young people and children's books, we're in the business of getting children to check us and making sure that it meets their needs. And then we're just thinking about the power of, which hadn't come out so much, but the power of you. The actual power of you as a representation to our young people, to us as writers in the room. When we see you, there was a statement, we created our own path. There was this winding road for each and every one of you to do this work, and our young people need to hear that. It doesn't mean A to B. It means I can find my passion and I can get there. And I just love that you all centered that experience as well. So there's so much power on this stage. There's so much power in this room amongst this community, and I hope that we continue to leverage that power for our young people and harness their power so that they can share theirs as well. In the spirit of Sankofa, where we've been and to where we're going.
Well put. Thank you so much to all the members of the panel.
I want to thank Joy Jones and our panelists. Will you give them another round of applause?